My name's Robbie Luckett. I'm director of the Margaret Walker Center and professor of history at Jackson State University. Today is September 23rd, 2021. It's approximately 9:23 a.m. Central Time. I'm with Marion McGee. Marion, for the purposes of the record, will you state your name and spell it for us?
Oh, certainly. I am Marion Melissa McGee, and it's Marion, MALISSAMCGEE.
And do I have your permission to record this interview?
Absolutely.
Let's begin with some biographical information, some background info on you. Would you tell us a little bit about where you're from, how you grew up, your family background, your education, those sorts of things?
Oh, wow. Certainly. I am a proud Arkansas native. I was born in Crittenden County, Arkansas, which is where West Memphis is, right over the bridge from Memphis, Tennessee. And grew up in what I would consider a more rural area of Arkansas for the first, till I was about 8 years old, which was just surrounded by family. A lot of my family roots are in that area, which is northeastern Arkansas. And so it was just an amazing place to grow up, where you could run outside with your bare feet and be in just droves of grass. And whether you're running into your neighbor's yard or, as we did, skating into our neighbor's yards, it was fine. It was a very small, close-knit community, and just a space where you as a kid, you could do anything. There were fruit trees everywhere. You could climb trees. You didn't have to go home for a snack because you could just pull snacks off trees between pecan trees and peach trees and apple trees. So it was just a beautiful place to grow up. And I think moving to what was the city when I was 8, I remember I guess I was in 3rd grade by then, we moved to Little Rock because my dad was military. So I'm a military brat as well. And had a chance to see a different part of the state. And Little Rock is the capital of Arkansas. It's probably the most metropolitan area of the state. Very different experience. And moving there, I guess that was like 1986 or 1987. We moved right into a historically Black community. That was walking distance from Little Rock Central High School. So our backyard, there was an alley, and you could walk the alley to the Central High School football games, which our babysitter at the time was a Central High School student. So we went to every Central High School football game. But that area, within about a year of us being there, the crack epidemic hit, and this quiet, sleepy community that had been just full of retired Black school teachers and barbers and just entrepreneurs, just a kind of a very quiet space, it changed completely. And all of a sudden you saw, you would hear people at night, you would have gunshots all of a sudden, and people breaking into cars and trying to break into homes. It was just it got really violent seemingly very quickly, where at one point it was fine to be outside, and then all of a sudden you start hearing, children getting caught in crossfires, and just from caught up in things that had nothing to do with being a kid. So we were only in Little Rock proper for about 14 months. And once it turned, we headed to the suburbs and headed to North Little Rock. So I spent the rest of my kind of upbringing in North Little Rock, our suburb there, Sherwood. And still an interesting time. I think that the greatest difference for me, up until that point, I'd always been in kind of mixed race environments. I'd always grown up with friends and classmates that were of every race, and we just, that was just what we did. And then to go to Sherwood, which was a suburb, that was an area that had not desegregated in the ways that the rest of the world had dealt with school desegregation. This was one of those communities where they opened parochial schools to keep Black and white students from going to school together. So all of a sudden, my brother and I'm starting middle school by then, my brother's starting high school, and we're being bused to all white schools. For me, that was 6th grade. So 6 through 12 was a very different experience, where I was, from that point forward, like most of my teachers had not had a Black student before. And it became evident that they were not welcoming of having a Black student in their classroom. And so it was an interesting kind of early experience with systemic racism, or at least the less subtle ways in which stereotypes can be projected upon you. I'd never had experiences where my intelligence was questioned, or just never had experiences where I was considered not capable. And to go from not having it and having had, white teachers all the time, but I'd never had an experience where my teacher did not think I was capable, to the extent that my parents literally had to advocate for me and my brother, who had been in gifted and talented or advanced placements spaces in elementary, to not be put into like remedial learning classes, because that was just kind of the standard by which we were treated, as if we were subnormal in some way. And so it was interesting, because I didn't know that it required a fight to be taken seriously. And it was a different kind of education to, of course, be a student, but also be hearing and experiencing things that I thought I heard my parents experience, 40 and 50 years prior, or 30 years prior, but I had no idea that kind of hidden racism still existed, and it hit us front and center. And there were so many. I could tell you semester by semester, there were so many incidents. I felt so bad for my brother, because I felt like he had it worse as a young Black male. Story after story, but there were things that you just never thought, like our school bus driver, for instance, used the N-word and told my brother to get off her bus and to go back to Africa. And when she was reprimanded, the assistant vice principal of the high school says, "Well, we let you all go to school with us. What more do you want? Why should the bus driver have to accommodate having someone on her bus that she's not comfortable with?" So it was just like, did we go back in time? Like, it was just a very strikingly different kind of experience. But of course, retrospect is 2020, and all those years later, after I finished, my brother and I joke and say we survived Sylvan Hills middle school and high school, that in surviving it, it does give you a set of resilience, or a set of skills that allow you to not presume that everyone is racist, but to really, because you want so badly to be seen as a whole person, especially as a kid, that the last thing, when these incidents come up, the last thing you want it to be is something about race. So having to deal with that over and over and over again, it gave both of us, I think, a very strong sense of, people are people, and you really, sometimes people's ignorance comes out as intolerance, but in some cases, they just have to make a choice to expose themselves to something different. And sometimes that difference is learning that Black people wash their hair, and learning that Black people don't all sell drugs, or that we don't all steal, and kind of fighting through those presumptions helps you to learn to communicate with people on finding common ground because I don't want people to go out in the world thinking that the way they were raised or the things they were told to believe were not true, and that we were living evidence that they weren't true, and we weren't unicorns. That for most, we were representative of most people. So it was interesting, but it was like I said, it was a resilience building experience, and it gave me I think it gave both of us an even greater appreciation for almost a hunger or desperation for going to historically Black colleges to make sure that there was some kind of counterbalance, and that was, I definitely will say, it was not a priority until it was. And then, as you start preparing for what college would be, that's when we knew. And we come from a family where everybody that I can think of, with the exception of a few, like, Yale, a few that cousins that went to Ivy League schools that were, that was a major thing. Everybody, I have like 6 generations of family members that attended Arkansas's Black college, or public Black college, University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. So that was my grandmother's alma mater. All of my aunts and uncles that the ones that went to college went to UAPB, or AMN, I should say. Arkansas's mechanical and normal college for those that went back in the day. And so the assumption was, as my parents would say, if you're going to college, our money's going to an HBCU. So that was where we were, I think, very much not just encouraged, but really excited about kind of having a different experience, different learning experience.
And you did find your way to an HBCU. Can you talk about that experience and what led you to Florida A&M University?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm a storyteller. I'm from the South, so we tell stories. Everything is a story. So my brother is about 3 years older than I am. So I'm the youngest of 2. My mom is the youngest of 12. My dad is the youngest of 6. So when you're the baby in the family, you tend to follow along with what your older siblings did, or at least that was what I thought I would do. He was a Morehouse student, and he was just adamant that I needed to go to Spelman because that's just where I needed to be. And so I applied, but I had another cousin at the time. And again, being from such a large family, my first cousins were like siblings because we did everything together. And I come from one of those families where if you spent the night at someone's house, it was only at a cousin's house. So you always had these opportunities to engage. So I had a cousin at Hampton. And when we attended her graduation, I just thought Hampton's campus was amazing. And I thought, this is the most beautiful college campus I've ever seen. I have to go to Hampton. Then I had another cousin at Clark, Atlanta. I was like, well, Michelle loves her experience at Clark, so I'm gonna apply to Clark. So I ended up applying to these like 8 different HBCUs, and Tennessee State, had never been on their campus in Nashville, but they offered me a full ride. So I was like, I'm gonna go to Tennessee State. And they had the program I wanted. And growing up going to UAPB homecomings, I wanted to be a dancing girl. That was a little known history fact. I was like, my mom was a majorette, my aunts were majorettes. I'm gonna be gonna go out and dance with the band, be a majorette. And Tennessee State had these beautiful, I forget what they call them, but I just thought they were the most beautiful things, just to go out and dance when the band dances at or performs halftime. So all of that being said, full ride, had already gotten my dorm assignment, everything was good to go. My cousin that was at Clark Atlanta graduated my senior year in high school, and we went to her graduation. Again, I can't tell you a cousin's graduation I haven't been to. That was always the standard every spring, was you were going to your cousin's graduations. And since we were in Atlanta at Clark, I had been, of course, to Spelman's campus because of Jason being at Morehouse. And I was like, I applied to Florida A&M, And Michelle, who was graduating from Clark, her older sister had gone to FAMU. And I was like, I don't remember us going to Kim's graduation. Could we possibly, on our drive back to Arkansas from Atlanta, could we just stop by FAMU's campus? Because Michelle's sister is saying, oh, but you have to, don't take FAMU out of the running. So it was, just serendipitous, honestly. My dad agreed. He's like, yeah, we can, take the trip, take the detour, go through Tallahassee to route back. And it just so happened that the dean of the business school was on site. We got to the school, and this is back in the day when, recruiters were active parts of the staff. So there was a recruiter on campus, and he gave us a campus tour, but he was like, let me call over to Dean's office, see if you can meet Dean Sybil Mobley. Dean Mobley came, and she sold us on this incredible 5-year program where you do both your undergraduate work, your bachelor's, and you come out with a master's in business administration, and you do these 3 internships, and just how prepared SBI, the School of Business and Industry, was for equipping students to go into the business world. And she was amazing. She really, I think back at that experience, like she sold me hook, line, and sinker. And left, we weren't on campus maybe more than 3 hours or so, and got in the car to head back home to Arkansas. And I was like, I'm going to FAMU. I don't care what I have to do. And my dad's like, yeah, this is nice, but it's a little far. He's like, I don't think you want to be that far. It's just, no. He was like, Tennessee State, you already got everything you need. It's only 6 hours from home. And it's, you could always come to FAMU for graduate school or, later on. And I'm like, no, like what she said, there's no other school doing what she's describing. And it was true. My mom was just like, I agree with you. You should go to FAMU. So she worked with me to persuade the other person in the car that this was the right choice. But what it meant was that whatever I didn't have in funding, I needed to find. So this was like, I don't know, late April probably of 96. I got home and I got busy, like signing up for pageants, signing up for essay contests. Just like, I gotta find this extra money because the only way I'm gonna persuade my dad is if I have the supplement of whatever FAMU was not gonna be able to offer in scholarships. And I did. I think I needed another like maybe 35 or maybe 4,000. I didn't need more than 5,000. Like, I just needed some more money. And I got to work and danced my way, danced in every pageant and wrote every essay that I could find, and got my desire. And I never regretted it. I was so thankful that it worked out, that I ended up going. FAMU at that time, and I think up to now, still produces is the biggest producer of Black MBAs in the country. And a big part of that is because of Sybil Mobley. And that was kind of one of FAMU's golden eras at that time, was, this idyllic time where you had students from all over the country. We were the top HBCU and, the College of the Year in 1997. And we had more National Merit finalists than Harvard at the time. Black National Merit finalists went to FAM. So it was a school where you were seeing people who even now are doing amazing things, but we felt, I felt privileged to be a part of, this cohort of people. And there are so many memories now that I look back on of just knowing I made the right choice and knowing that it wasn't just that I was going to an HBCU because it was an HBCU. Of course, that was an important criteria, but it was a program of study that really exposed me to things that, growing up the way I grew up, I say to people, advanced placement in Little Rock or North Little Rock schools is not advanced placement in Washington, D.C. schools or New York schools. Like the scholars and the writers, the things that I was exposed to at FAMU, I'd never even heard of Zora Neale Hurston until I took my first humanities course. I'd never been exposed to certain classics, or so to speak, because they just weren't things that dealt with Black culture or Black writers or Black arts, just weren't a part of the curriculum that I had been exposed to. So it was just this whole other world that opened up, and it was like nothing else that I'd ever experienced. And the benefit of any HBCU student can tell you, you're in and it's not an exclusively Black space by no means, but you're in a predominantly Black space for, this concentration of 4, in my case, it was a 5-year program. It's preparing you for the outside world, but it gives you the freedom to know that your race is not a factor in the space. And that was just the most liberating experience, to just be able to be, your effort, whatever you put in was what you were going to be judged on, or that it was a truly a true meritocracy, if you want to say it that way. It was just an amazing experience. And to this day, I talk about, my professors were very much so equipped to treat us like we had never been away from home, to step in. They were given the discretion to talk to you like they were your parents. And they did not, allow for certain behavior, which I didn't realize was so special. I didn't realize that, being held accountable, being told to dress a certain way, like you couldn't come to class in pajamas. You couldn't come to class unprepared. And if they needed to, they would easily threaten to, contact a parent. Like if I don't see you operating at the standard that I expect. That was just incredible. I didn't realize that that's not a common thing, because that was what my classmates experienced. So to this day, I have, of course, most of my professors are Facebook friends, but I still have professors I call on. I still, am in contact with, because they were just as committed to my success and my ability to be the best self, or realize my best self as I was. And in some cases, being 19, they were more committed at times. But it was the right experience, and one that I never regret. And it made the challenges of middle school and high school so much more worth it, because you gain a different perspective. And I think it was a balancing perspective.
So you go to FAMU, you're studying business, you're in this MBA program. Yeah. Did you think that you were going to end up in the museum world? What was this path that led you to what you do today?
Right. Like, how in the world did you go from this to, I have so many classmates that have asked that, like, but you were, and this is the funny thing. I was headed for the corporate finance track. That was my love. I hated accounting, struggled through every accounting class that I had. And I don't know why, but I didn't like accounting, but I loved finance. And finance is uniquely different, especially from a business school program from standpoint. So my concentration in finance really gave me an understanding of how not just corporations, but individuals build assets, maintain those assets, and grow those assets, and how to offset debt, how to build financial solvency over time. And that just really, it intrigued me. I was on internship, since this is 2021, we just celebrated the 20th commemoration of 9/11. So I was on internship as a part of my program of study. You had to do 3 internships, a 4-month, an 8-month, and a 12-month. So I was in my 12-month assignment, and 9/11 occurred. I remember being on internship, watching the news with my boss. We were just stunned. At that point, that particular internship, I was working for a real estate development company, and our development firm, Educational Development Company of America, we were basically a small startup. It was run by 2 FAMU grads who both had gotten their MBAs through the business program. And one of which was the radio show, Tom Joyner, the Tom Joyner Morning Show. Tom's youngest son, Oscar Joyner, started this firm with another classmate. And so me being me, when I found out about the internship opportunity, I loved the idea of interning with a startup, because I thought, this was a time when in Silicon Valley, startups were the wave of the future. It was, the early 2000s, and, business was changing, business world was changing. And I knew I didn't want to do Pfizer, who was a big Eli Lilly. A lot of the pharmaceutical firms were huge recruiters of business students. And I was like, I don't want to do pharmaceutical sales. I don't want to go to New York and work for Citibank or Citigroup. But I thought my plan, I'll say, was to go work for American Express, because American Express had this management training program, and they did a lot of work with funding and financing for startups. So I thought, if I intern with a startup, I will be a more competitive candidate for this American Express managerial training program once I graduated. 9/11 happens in September, and the world, for those of us that were alive, the world shut down. Like, for the first month, I want to say, maybe 2 months, no flights were going anywhere. If it wasn't a military aircraft, there were no planes moving. And then once the airline industry started to recover, the finance sector, which was heavily concentrated in New York, shut down. It was just all out panic. And for those of us in business school, a lot of my classmates had offers that were rescinded, job offers that were promised that they couldn't no longer offer because the companies couldn't take on any new hires. A lot of people just were in panic or losing money, because when you can't fly to, across the country on a regular basis, you can't keep money coming in. So that kind of domino effect hit the entire finance sector, and American Express put its management training program on hold, which was just heartbreaking for me. Because although I was on internship, I'd already finished all of my class load. So the only thing I had left was to finish my internship. So I was able to walk on our commencement ceremony, which was December 2001. So I, quote unquote, graduated, or at least did the ceremonial graduation, knowing that I would have, through May to finish my internship, and then plan to start a new job, like fly to Minneapolis and start a new life at American Express. And my hope was that maybe by the summer, they will have changed their mind, and maybe they will have regrouped. And of course, that wasn't the case. Once I called and spoke with the recruiter at American Express, they were like, no, we definitely will be probably not resuming it for the next 2 years. But, if you're still interested in 2 years, let's see. So it was, you're graduating college, you're on internship, which is not like full-time pay, and I needed to find a job. And so I was just looking for what would be next. I was already working with this, like I said, this real estate development company, and I had done, work throughout college, work study and other part-time work. And so I got offers, just from, I guess, having done a good job, at least I'd like to think so, So I had, former bosses that reached out like, I heard you graduated or saw where you graduated. What are you going to do next? And most of those were, work in Tallahassee. And so it's like, well, I can stay here. I've been living as a college student, and it made financial sense to live like a college student and just find a job that would allow me to, get a fresh start. And the internship, the owners of the company, Charles and Oscar, ended up extending an offer once they heard that I was looking to, possibly take a job with a former employer. And they were like, we're growing our team, and you've been a great fit, and we'd love to have you stick around. And at the time, we were doing real estate development exclusively for HBCUs, which was just building off-campus housing. But what was unique about the business model that was used, it worked specifically with the board of trustees for these HBCUs. So at that point in 2000, that was 2002, we were flying, 2001, we had been flying prior to 9/11 to Jackson, Mississippi, almost weekly, at least twice a month, was flying in to do a development for the Palisades. And the Palisades was this off-campus housing and, essentially where you work with a development firm, which was our firm, to identify land, to do the feasibility study for developing off-campus housing, and then developing a deal with the trustees where the university would eventually, within about 10 years, absorb that property as a revenue producing property for the university. So it was a unique business model because it limited the university's risk while giving them some immediate relief for, housing, which most HBCUs needed. And it was something we took and were, taking it around the country. Literally every HBCU you can think of, we were visiting campuses or meeting with boards of trustees and pitching this development idea to bring them off-campus housing that they could ultimately or subsequently absorb into their coffers. And so it was interesting work. It was something, of course, as an HBCU grad that I cared about. And it was giving me exposure to HBCUs that I'd never been to places like Texas Southern and Texas A&M and Virginia Union. And so we were doing that type of work. And that just it was exciting. It was different. And so I ultimately thought that's what I was going to be doing for the foreseeable future. And I remember my boss had me do like a 10-year, he's like, give me your 10-year plan. And I was like, okay, this is, I'm 23, maybe, I think, 23. Like, okay, well, this is about where I'm going to be by, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And within about, we were doing maybe 3 or 4 deals, and a deal meaning developments underway. And so at that point, we were starting to gain visibility and attracted another investor that wanted to buy their company. And that's, for a startup, that's the gold mine. Like, that's where you want to be. That's the sweet spot. You want to attract an investor that it relieves you of the demand for having to churn out so much revenue, where they could develop a partnership and kind of share in the overhead cost. And the only caveat was that the offices were going to move to Atlanta. And at that point, I bought my first house, like literally had just closed on my first house, my first little mini townhouse. And it was like, well, I'll just stay here in Tallahassee, maintain the Tallahassee office. and I'll just, come to Atlanta as needed. And for so many reasons, I didn't realize what a bold move that was, like, to tell my boss, no, I have no interest in relocating with the rest of the firm. At that time, I just thought, well, that's not what I'm interested in. I've started building a community and a life here. And his thing was like, you just sell your house and move on. And so I'm proud of myself because I think it was one of those first opportunities where I spoke up and only did what I felt was right to do. And, didn't know at the time that companies don't have to keep you on board just because you're on board. So we went through this back and forth. I presented a proposal for how it would, be a satellite location for the company. And he was like, no, you're not a team player. You're not all in. So I had my first job termination in life, and I just was completely humiliated. But I thought I never had that experience where I just didn't see it coming. Like I didn't see it not working out because I just knew that it would. I felt like, I'm a part of this team. I'm committed to it. And I learned quickly that you're not indispensable. Like you may be a great team member, but you're not irreplaceable in that sense. So they moved on and then I moved on. And it was another opportunity to then kind of reset, recalibrate. And from there, I started really discovering like, well, what else could I do with, again, reach out to my former professors. What should I do? What can I do? So at that point, one of my professors said, maximize this MBA, figure out what all you can do with it. So I ended up keeping in the same kind of genre of work, which at the time I was doing strategic planning, strategic development for a real estate firm and marketing, which meant putting together PowerPoint presentations, developing proposals to persuade people to spend money, and developing operating budgets to show them how the money would be used. So it's like, oh, I know how to do this. So I ended up within that year getting hired by the state. The state of Florida had a state housing trust fund. I guess all states have them, but to kind of fast forward is becoming a very long story. But at the end of the day, I ended up keeping in the vein of real estate development. But when I moved to this position with the state, I came to understand how you could do housing development in a way that was most affordable for people. And that was something I'd never had the opportunity to work kind of from a public policy standpoint of this is how government funding can be used to help build affordable housing across the state. So that became my next kind of understanding of, okay, this is how you do economic development and real estate development in a community-centered way. Love that, did that for another going on probably almost 8 years. Then we had another economic crisis. And being the MBA that I was like, I never in my life in 2008, I remember standing at work looking at the Wall Street Journal where Lehman Brothers was filing bankruptcy. And I was floored. Like I never imagined that would be possible because that was the gold standard. Like those firms, the books and the things that had been written about how they did business was the standard by which all finance worked. Borrowing, using debt to finance deals, and then paying off that debt using the revenues that those deals presented, which was the same thing we had been doing, but we were doing it with trust funds. We were doing it with state tax dollars that had been collected. So there again, life hands you an unexpected shift in the economy, and you got to shift with it. So my shift ended up being kind of finding work where I could find it. And somehow, I don't know how, I found out that the US Commerce Department was looking for partnership development people to do partnership development in North Florida. And it just felt divine. It was not just serendipitous, but I was like, I read the job description, like, I do this, I know this, I know how to do that. So there again, you pick up you transition. So then I ended up working for the Commerce Department, and this was 2008. So this was the 2 years prior to every census, which I didn't realize. They dispatch people into the field to try to communicate to hard to count communities, which Black and Brown communities, the benefit of the census and how the census is used to inform public policy. So I then became a partnership specialist for the Commerce Department, did that for 2 years. And at the end of, well, I guess 2.5 years after the census is taken in 2010, you are then given kind of the opportunity, if you choose to be absorbed into the Commerce Department here in DC, because that's where that data is then used and developed for other studies. And again, for whatever reason, I wasn't ready to leave Tallahassee. And I had another one of those bosses, it was end of 2010, it was like December 2010. She's like, what are you gonna do? You could just move to DC, come here. It's like, I don't think I'm ready. So I basically put back my entrepreneurial hat on, which I had for a while at that point, like what was called M&M Creative Consulting. I had done that back in like 2001. So I just kept that business license and found some companies that were in need of the skills that I had and started doing consulting work. Fast forward to, say, March of 2011, I was under contract with an attorney friend, and I had another, or client, I should say, and then I had another client that was a nonprofit. And they were like, so what are you gonna do next? And I was like, I'm doing consulting. And they were like, but what are you gonna do next? Like, what's your next thing? It's like consulting. So I was like, I'm gonna make a go of like pushing this as a full-time thing. And so the friend said, well, I want you to meet someone who I think you could do some consulting with work for. And that person was Altamise Barnes, who was a museum founder, who was, like the other two clients I had, trying to kind of reorganize their organization in a way that would allow them to retain and recruit new talent. And the other two clients that I had that experience with, we basically just needed to systematize like a training program, start to document processes so that they could hire new people and have a certain system followed. And so when I went, they set up the meeting for us. It was my first time ever going to the Riley Museum, which was a historic house museum. I'd done fundraisers gone to fundraisers on behalf of the museum, but I'd never been inside. And that meeting, that was like April of 2011, was life-changing, like literally transformative. We were supposed to meet for an hour, and we were there talking for about 4 hours. And by the time I left, I just was so impressed with what Mrs. Barnes described, which was essentially the generations that had come before her and how, as a young person, she knew of Mr. Riley, she knew of this house, she knew the work that they had put into trying to save the house from demolition. And now, as she was starting to consider retirement, that she was at that point in her late 60s, how all those years that had gone before, she felt so deeply committed to honoring the work that the previous generations had done to preserve Mr. Riley's legacy. So my conversation with her was really, it was transformative in that I never thought how much commitment it took to take someone else's vision and make sure that it was upheld. But then I also thought, whatever you need to keep this organization going, I'm happy to help. So we met several times after that to develop like a consulting agreement, which was what I had with the other two organizations I worked with. And it was like, well, I'll do a 1-year contract, come in and do an assessment of the organization, help you develop like a staffing plan, and then get you on track to find and hire your replacement so that you can comfortably by, within say a two to 3 year period, be able to comfortably retire and know that this work will continue. Never thought in a million years that that person would be me. That was because that was not the premise by which we came together. We were talking about what her needs were and how I could help her get that achieved. And honestly, Robbie, within 6 months before that year ended, the contract I think took effect May of 2011, like pretty much within a month of us talking. By the end of the year, I was like, I love Black museums. Like, I love this whole notion. But what I must say, we put a pin there. What's very instructive about what Ms. Barnes did, and I now, 10 years later, is amazing. I deeply appreciate more than I ever imagined. Within my first 3 months, like May, June, and July, she not only like had me do an assessment of Riley Museum. So I was meeting, attending their board meetings, kind of learning how the organization functioned as a nonprofit. But she also took me to the Florida network sites because she wanted me to understand that the Riley Museum in and of itself was a gold mine, but what she had created and founded as the statewide network of museums, which was the Florida African American Heritage Preservation Network, FAAPHN, FOPN, as we would say, that it was really a demonstration of how much stronger historically Black institutions are when they work together. And it was the network that was able to work as a collective to vie for state funding from the Florida legislature every year. It was a network that was able to do like sharing of information across the institution. So if you had a new institution coming online, they could be mentored by another existing institution. If there was a grant, a statewide grant that the Florida Humanities Council had, they could share lessons learned or what you needed to do to buy for that state money. So I put this in my I reflect on this in my dissertation. I had a chance to meet Rowena Stewart. I didn't know how tremendous that was until years later, that she had taken me to Jacksonville and she wanted me to meet, kind of these matriarchs, not just matriarchs, there were men too, patriarchs across the state who, just like her, had taken on the responsibility to preserve the history of a local community. And Rowena Stewart is just, because she's profiled in my dissertation, I know what a divine experience that was, because she was just so generous and talked about the work she was doing there in Jacksonville. And I didn't know at the time, that was like after 40 years of having served within the community and served like 7 different institutions across the United States. And she was retiring in Jacksonville, Florida, and still serving and preserving the history of the La Villa community, the Ritz Theater and Museum, just still the American Beach community, where Dr. Jenna Cole's family is. Like she was still doing that work well into, at that point, I think she was in her late 70s or early 80s. So that was a part of kind of falling in love, like this just endearing qualities that it turned me from the consultant who was there to kind of observe and provide guidance, which I did, in the form of like reports and here are some things that can be useful. But it turned me into this person who's like, I don't know how, but I want to support this. Like, I want to see this continue. And I will never forget when I had that discussion with Mrs. Barnes about, I think I really would like to continue working with you all in some capacity. I didn't know what capacity. I said, but my only concern is that I'm a finance person and I didn't major in history. I didn't, I went to the Black Archives on campus for assignments, but I didn't formally study this work. And her response was so, it was so welcoming and so warming. It was just, that doesn't matter. Just like the fact that you know finance and you know business, she's like, and you know how to run an organization. She said that's much more important from the standpoint of administering the grants and the money that's coming into a museum. She said, because we're not a business, but we do business. Like, we need to be profitable in order to survive. And she said, and you've done real estate. And we need to build an extension. Like, they had been trying for a while to get a capital campaign off the ground. And so once I learned, like, oh, so there are contributions I can make. Like, terms that other people in the museum field at the time, staff, when they heard things like, we have to go through and develop, we have a building coming online. So we've got a development team of like construction team coming on site to help us through that process. I already knew how to do that. So it was like, we were doing this for sites out of state. So yeah, this is easy. Like, this is just right here next to the main house. Yeah, we can get this done. We need to raise money to do it. Yes. We need to do bond financing with the city, municipal bonds. Absolutely. Done that before too. And it just happened to be this marriage of skills that I never realized, I never would have known would have been useful in a museum setting. And it just so happened that she was willing to teach me the stuff I didn't know. She was willing to show me and apprentice me into, this is the history of these communities. This is why this history matters. This is how we preserve it. And, this is the nomenclature of museum or preservation work. But the aspects of like growing a donor base, persuading people to give money, building financing plans, that stuff was like, I have that part I knew how to do. And that, I think, for her was a relief, because it wasn't as if she needed to go and find 3 or 4 different people that had these skill sets. And what started out as a consulting agreement, by the time that May of 2012, when that contract was due to expire, instead of doing the option, the renewal option on the contract, she wrote me into her IMLS grant. And she's like, she already had an IMLS grant underway. She said, I'm going to ask IMLS if I can make this, change on my current grant. And then when we go back for funding for another multi-year grant, see if we can make the case for succession planning and do that as a new opportunity. So that was 2012. So by November of 2012, we had worked together on the succession planning grant, and we were able to get that funding awarded. I think the IMLS awards by like summer of 2013. But what was interesting about Mrs. Barnes, she was and Dr. Dixon told me this, he was the archivist at the time. He said she is a learn by doing person. So from the time that it changed, the shift, it was like, okay, we have a state grant due June 1st for state funding. You can come to my house. We're gonna work on the grant this night, and this night. We have an IMLS. I've never forget. It was like 2012. We had an IMLS convening in Washington D.C. And she's like, "I'm not going. You and Dixon are gonna go. You're gonna report out on the grant." And I'm like, I don't know. I just work here. I'll go do whatever is needed. So it was that kind of, she would invite me to things. It's like, okay, I'm here. I want you here. I want you to see how we operate in these different spaces. So it was very much an apprenticeship, but it started immediately. It was just like, okay, once the shift happened that spring of 2012, it's like, okay, here's how we're going to function differently. And we began working in cohesion, like versus, before, where she as the director is making decisions. Now she's coming and saying, okay, well, Marion, what do you think? How would you approach it? And then she was very instructive in like a teacher, because she is a teacher by trade. Well, this is how we've done it. This is why we've done it this way. And down to just the most granular details of how the organization had functioned at that point for its like a 19-year history. It hadn't quite reached 20 years yet. And so it was just a very generative experience. And it was a very just welcomed change. And I like I said, I felt it was so organic that it worked, it synced, and I never looked back. Like I had no reason to want to do anything else. And then the more I grew into the position, at that point, after we got the IMLS funding, I officially became the assistant director. And from that point, I guess that was like fall of 2012, when we would go to AAAM or go anywhere else, she's like, yes, this is my successor. This is the person who, it was like, I'm still in my learning phase. So it was really, really tremendous. And even the transition, working with our board of directors, transitioning into the executive director role, it was really just, I don't want to say it wasn't seamless, but it was welcoming. It was a way to see how generational transfer could happen. And then also see the importance of those relationships that had been established for decades. Some of those relationships, were in place before I was ever born. So I really came to appreciate what it meant to build community, what it meant to, build consensus across a community, and how it developed me as a contributor into a space where you don't have to, as a leader, you don't have to know everything. You can be transparent about what you bring to the table, and then also be teachable to learn the things that you don't know. And that's perfectly okay in a leadership setting, because you also can learn from people who have no desire to be quote unquote in charge, but who are just as committed to the organization. And that's from volunteers to part-time staff to interns, that there's this shared, learning that goes on. And even though you as the leader, the executive, ultimately bear the responsibility for, the solvency of the organization, the health, of the staff, or at least the keeping the staff motivated, that we're still in it together. And I say that because I feel like my time as a director in that space, being able to build a team, having work study students and interns that you see matriculate through college and grad school, and then they come back as staff, or you're able to welcome them back on as staff. It was an amazing experience, and everything that we accomplished, from growing our revenue streams to, taking everything online, transitioning, what do you call it? Not manual, but analog processes to digital. I laugh because at that point in 2011, 2012, these things were still being done by hand and by paper. And that includes AAAM, like registrations and everything. And it was just like to see, to lead that process and to guide that process, that for me just felt like, of course, all this needs to be digital. Of course, people need to be making payments digitally. Of course, they can't still be mailing in checks. Like now that seems so second nature. At the time, 10 years ago, it was still, 10 years ago, the U.S. Treasury Department had to persuade retirees that not receiving Social Security checks, hand checks, would be okay. that you could trust that if we said we're going to transfer that money into your account, it would get there safely. So the same thing was true in trying to bridge generations, where we're trying to build a base of support with younger supporters, younger professionals, but you already had this strong base of support of people who had been alive when the namesake of the museum was still alive, like who had been his students. So or their parents had been his students. So they had a way of wanting to, receive a handwritten note, a thank you, and they wanted to see something in the mail, inviting them to an event. And then you had a group of people or an audience that also, if you didn't email it to them, they would never see it. So it was learning how to be that bridge between these generations, and then of course equipping a whole new generation of younger people to come into the field. So just I say it was all the things. It was wonderful, terrible, challenging, rewarding. I mean, it's all the things that go into running a nonprofit. Writing grants and not getting the money, and then writing the grant and getting the full money, and the ebb and flow of that experience of how do you build the case for support for something you believe in so strongly. And it just, I don't know, it was the right pivot, if you will, career pivot for me. And it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful.
And of course, you then would transition from the Riley house as the executive director and into a new job. And let's talk a little bit about how that process happened and what you do today.
Oh my gosh! As I look at Lonnie's cover photo over my shoulder, I didn't mean to leave that out. As I described, my entree into the museum field was, and I heard Juanita Moore say this, it's not something you can plan for. Like your career, your journey it's your journey. And the path that led me to the Smithsonian would not have been possible if I had not gotten that apprenticeship with Mrs. Barnes. If I hadn't started as a consultant. And from a standpoint, when you come in as a consultant in any space, you're there to learn. That's that frames your perspective. So as I had learned the organization, and I used to tell people, like, I'm a student of the Riley Museum. I'm a student of Florida's African American history. I'm learning it. But when you're coming from that standpoint, although I felt like finance and real estate development was second nature, I would read any piece of history I could. I would pick up, just any books I found, especially if they were written by a local author or they were developed by a local historian, because the person who lives in that community knows that space and has these little anecdotal pieces of information that you otherwise wouldn't know. I would watch oral history interviews that had been done with different members of the communities that made up the Florida network. And the opportunity with the National Museum, Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, was really and truly, I just say it was divine, because it came, that was 2015. I think that, as far as I understand, the Office of Strategic Partnerships, and what was at that moment early before the museum opened, National Museum, when Lonnie recruited Dr. Deborah Mack in 2012, Deborah Mack already had a great relationship with Mrs. Barnes, because Dr. Mack lived in Savannah, Georgia. We were right there in Tallahassee, and apparently she had done consulting work for the Florida Network in past iterations. So when I come aboard and I'm doing Florida Network, something I forgot to say, we did biennial conferences, statewide conferences, which meant Marion learned to cut her teeth on conference planning. in 2011, actually, when the Riley Museum hosted the Association of African American Museums conference in Tallahassee. That was amazing. So I, from the start, I'd already started the job or the consulting work, learning through meeting and interacting with Florida Network members. And within like 3 months, I was meeting museum professionals from all over the United States. And I just didn't know that, African American museums were just this wide and vast network. I did not understand it to be that until you see it face to face. So having all that happen in the first year, by 2013, it was then time for our next biennial conference. And I remember organizing that one for, we hosted it at Bethune-Cookman University, and then meeting and bringing in people like Dr. Jessica Harris, who wrote High on the Hog, bringing in people like Dr. Matt to do additional assessments of, this is what we're trying to do with the network, this is how we're trying to grow museums across the state of Florida. And then fast forward to 2015, we were doing a similar thing, but we brought the network conference back to Tallahassee, and then using that to really make a statement within the Florida legislature for why Florida's African American museums needed additional support. So I was just engrossed in it. And I got a fellow AAAM member when we were in, I think we were 2015. I think the conference was in Birmingham, maybe. I feel like we were in Birmingham. And, I was on the AAAM board. The board meets before the meets in the city where the conference would be held. And a fellow board member said, "You heard about this this position that the Smithsonian has?" And I was like, or emailed me. And when I saw them, they said, "You are gonna apply for this position." And I was like, "No, I have my hands full." They apparently said something to another colleague of theirs, who at the time was a big mentor of mine. And I won't disclose my mentor's name, but she worked at the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum for a number of years. And she had really been just a shoulder I could lean on and guidance for how to continue to grow the Riley Museum staff. And she really got on me about, why would you not apply if you know you could do the job? And I thought, well, I like Tallahassee. She's like, "But you're gonna do this for the rest of your life." I was like, I don't know about the rest of my life, but I like it. So through doing what mentors do, I really took time and took seriously what her guidance was, which was, she said, don't ever debate something without giving yourself a chance to even be considered. It's like, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And if you don't at least take the shot, you don't know what could happen. So I was like, I've done a federal application before. I worked for the federal government before. So I knew kind of how that worked. And I was probably days from that deadline. I think that whenever the application cycle was closing, I was like, let me just put together, and I just stayed up one night, all night. So let me just put together a solid application, put it forth, and told my mentor, called her the next day, like, I did apply. I don't know that I would ever consider relocating, but I did apply. And then after you apply for something, you kind of just try to set it aside. At least with grants, you just try to move on and keep working, keep plugging away. Lo and behold, I get an interview. And then I'm like, oh, I got an interview. I got to prepare. So doing the interview, I started really preparing for the interview, reading everything I could about the National Museum, its development, how it came about, kind of the history of the legislation that created it, any and everything that was online. There was, a groundbreaking ceremony that was on YouTube. I just tried to really get understanding of what the the scale of this thing was, because I had just not really processed that part. And in going to the interview, I remember thinking, well, I know what I know, but just like I said about the experience of meeting Mrs. Barnes, I thought, well, I have this set of skills. And I'm sure if it's a Smithsonian thing, they're probably looking for this set of skills. So you get, you do your interview, and the questioning around partnership development and the questioning around working with different institutions and, relationships with HBCUs. And it felt like deja vu. And I'm like, oh, I've been developing relationships with HBCUs since 2001. I've been doing this kind of work for much longer than I realized. And it again just felt like, oh wait, this is a marriage of a lot of different things. And what I remember articulating in that exchange was the interview, the committee of people that interview you. It's like, what makes you think you can do this job? You get some form of that question from the people in the room. And it was like, well, I know what I've done across the state and working with institutions across the state. And at that point, by 2015, no, that was 2016. So by 2016, I had an IMLS grant that we had written. I had been traveling between Georgia, sites across Florida, sites across Virginia, and Georgia, Florida, Virginia, and it was called our Cast the Net, in North Carolina. That was the fourth. So I had this multi-state grant that I was managing as the facilitator and going and meeting with, because Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia, in addition to Florida, all had statewide African American heritage networks. So that part was like, well, I already know how to work in multi-state settings, because you have to be on the ground. Like, you have to understand what the challenges are for the sites that are being represented. And once it clicked that, oh, what the strategic partnerships or the community and constituent services for the Smithsonian was seeking to do was to build those types of relationships across the United States and in the Caribbean, because they wanted to make sure that federal funding specifically for African American museums wasn't lopsided and absorbed by this new Smithsonian Museum, and that it left all of these other Black institutions at a loss. And that the real goal of developing this office or this department within the museum was to be the face and the external arm of NAMOC into these communities, so that those relationships would remain fluid. And once I got that understanding, I was like, oh, I gotta get this. Now I gotta do this. This makes so much sense. And I honestly, I did get the offer. And I remember talking with the human resource officer, Miss Yvonne. She laughs at me to this day, because when she called me to say, Marion, just very pleased to let you know that they've decided to extend you an offer and you'll get a formal package in the mail and all this kind of stuff. And I was elated. I was really floored, like, oh my goodness, I just got a call from Human Resources, for a Smithsonian museum. And I literally, first call with Miss Yvonne, I said, but I'm in this, I'm managing this grant right now. Can I delay my acceptance until October, until we end our grant cycle? And this is like March. No, this is February 2016. And she's like, no, this is March. And she's like, you might can delay it for 6 weeks, but not 6 months. We're opening a museum, and I think we need you sooner than later. So it was a kind of a reality check of like, oh, if I'm gonna do this, I really am gonna have to do this now. And it didn't register that I wouldn't have time to like, oh, I can have 3 to 6 months and then make my way to to DC. She was like, no, ma'am. She said, I know that they can give you a little time because you have to relocate, so give you time to find a place. But yeah, we're opening in the next 6 months. We need you immediately. So that was interesting because it literally, I had to call my board chair, had a meeting with my board chair and vice chair, then talked with our treasurer, like just really like, okay, what is the impact? What will we do? We had a conversation and they were like, you do not, I remember my chair, the vice chair at the time, he's like, you don't turn down this. He's like, you don't turn down the Smithsonian offer. He's like, I don't want you to go, but this is not what you do. He's like, this is not the move. You don't say no to, he was like, at what point would you ever have a chance to help open a national museum on the National Mall? And I thought, I don't know. And it took everything in me to find the words. I remember I had a staff of 7 people and I met with each staff member individually, like come in to the office, close the door, and let me explain what's about to happen, because I didn't want them to hear about it after the board meeting. So it's like the board's meeting this afternoon. They got, an email notification last night. I want to let you know from, you hear it from me. And the tears, it was tears of just sadness, of, bittersweet, like we're excited for you, but we also, and I'm like, I'm excited too, but I can't believe that I'm about to leave. And I've been at that point in Tallahassee for 20 years. So it was a lot. It was amazing, but it was a lot. So I literally had about 2 weeks to sell my furniture to, I had wonderful landlords at that time. So they were very understanding about terminating my lease. I had to depend on like friends to come over and help me pack. And literally I was like, I'm just going to put everything in storage and figure something out. And I had classmates here in DC that let me like fly up, stay with them until I could, so I could find, like, go and tour different apartments. It was just a whirlwind, like 2 weeks. So I, made the announcement, let everybody know. I came to DC and looked for apartments, brought that information back, flew back to Tallahassee, finished packing up my house. My really dear friend and church member organized a going away, like a surprise going away party. And it was a lot. It was very emotional. It was very, very hard to kind of transition. And I say this to say that as hard as it was to like leave what was familiar, I wasn't here. I started work here at the National Museum. I think my start date was like May of, my first day was like May 2016. And within like 3 days, I was like, I can't believe it took me this long to make a decision. I was like, this is amazing. It was amazing. It was amazing. Just the scale of what we were undertaking was amazing. But the people and the same, I will say this as we get ready to close out, because I didn't mean to talk this long. The same passion and commitment that Mrs. Barnes articulated, that Rowena Stewart and people all across the state, I could name so many museum founders or directors who I work with across the state of Florida and in Georgia, working with like Jeannie Syriac in Georgia and others in North Carolina and like Phyllis in Virginia. Like when you talk with people who've done this work on the ground, like grassroots, that same passion was articulated by the people who were here at the National Museum and were hired in 2006 and had been working behind the scenes for 10 years. And when I met them, and those were people like Renee Anderson, And I remember Renee gave me a ride in the van because she was, yes, the head of collections, but as the head of collections for this museum, she was still, driving vans, picking up pieces, picking up items that needed to be transported that were so delicate that she personally had to take them from the storage facility and bring them to the museum to make sure that they were, handled appropriately. Having those conversations, people like her, like people like Marion Gill, it was amazing to see that same passion was shared. It was just at a different scale, but they took seriously the work. And once I saw, like, I was with my tribe, even though I was in a different environment, I still was around people who cared deeply about Black people, Black history, and the way in which that history is presented and preserved, and the way those stories are told. And that just made me feel like, okay, I know 2 people in DC, but it's going to be okay. I will be able to regroup. I'll be fine. And I knew, like I said, within days of starting the job, like, oh, this is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And I still pinch myself today when I think about, I don't know all the things, the forces, the stars that had to align to allow me to be a part of this space. But I am deeply grateful that all the journey, that it twisted and turned and led me here, because it's been a joy. I mean, like I said, it can, with anything, you'll have good and bad with everything. You'll have challenges no matter where you are, but it really, at the end of the day, is still worth it.
So we're getting towards the end, as you mentioned, and I'm grateful for all the time you've spent with me. But so basically 2 last questions, and maybe one can move into the other. So you come to the National Museum, you're in the Office of Strategic Partnerships. For my students in particular who are going to be listening to these, what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis now?
Okay. So
what is your job? What do you do? And also, you've mentioned it, and this is part of what we're doing at the Margaret Walker Center in terms of a AAAM oral history collection. So everyone we're talking to is related and in the Association of African American Museums World. How does that work translate into your relationship and your history with AAAM? So they're kind of 2 different questions. Like, what are you doing today, and what's your role with AAAM, but and your history with AAAM? But I think they're related, but really important pieces of what I hope we can get to here before we have to wrap this up.
Before you run out of film, right? Back in the day when we would run out of film. I'll quickly answer the question about what do I do every day. So the day-to-day, my official title is, I think, museum. I have to look at my business card. Research and program specialist, something along those. Oh, well, let me say this. I think I'm a program and research specialist, and I'm the program manager of the HBCU History and Culture Access Consortium. I literally will give you my email signature. As you can see, titles are fluid. Essentially what that means in real time is, I call it museum strategizing. Like, I'm a museum strategist, and that's working with African American historic institutions, primarily in the United States, but we do have partners across the Caribbean and on the continent of Africa, where in various countries on the continent, where I work daily, literally, to align those needs or to assess the needs of those institutions and find some alignment or strategic collaborative effort that can align their need with the resources of the Smithsonian. And that can take many forms. So in past iterations, in the before times, before COVID, it was developing, say, a workshop or series of workshops. It may be initiating some type of convening. In its current form, it's our most recent thing is this HBCU initiative. So with an initiative that's a multi-year initiative, it's getting to the granular detail of what every phase of funding is going to require, and then how we meet those deadlines and do so within budget. So it's a lot of relationship building. It's a lot of Zoom calls right now. Previously, before 2020, it was a lot of meetings, a lot of flights in and out of cities. And what was, I think, most rewarding, if you will, with working within OSP, within our department, it allowed for identifying those areas where Black history is not widely known. So places like New Mexico, places like Joseph, Oregon, and telling the stories, like the institutions that are telling the stories of the timber plantations, and Black people from Arkansas and Oklahoma that were recruited to Oregon to come and clear timber as the West was being settled in the late 19th century. So it was an opportunity to go out and find where this work was happening, and in engaging with those communities to make sure that we don't only tell the story of what happened in Birmingham or Memphis or Jackson, but that we tell this united story of histories that date back to the beginning of the country's founding. And so that's a lot of the work that I do, is making connections. It feels like the same work I was doing in Tallahassee, just with a larger swath of institutions. And then learning also how to strategically think and forecast what we don't know and what we need to maybe equip organizations to know as we move forward. And that's a resource when you're in a well-resourced institution, and Smithsonian definitely is one of the most well-funded institutions in the world. So it means that the newest technologies, the newest things happening with virtual reality or augmented reality within museum spaces, how do we bring those types of resources and tools into these spaces as well? But first, you got to listen and assess. You got to know what the needs are. And you only get that by listening. And you only can listen if there's a relationship of trust and shared mutual respect. So that's a big part of what my day job is. A lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, lots of meetings. And then somewhere around 6 p.m., you try to sit down and do the work of writing, writing it all up to prepare to do it again the next day. And then as it relates to AAAM, there's so much I could say. AAAM is since I told the story about coming from Arkansas and, attending an HBCU, AAAM is that safe space, that safe professional, if you will, trade association for museum professionals who are dedicated to the preservation of African-American history and culture. And as my friend Robbie can tell you, it's not exclusive to the color of your skin. It's a place where people with a shared commitment to this work, to the work of the business of preservation, where you can just, get replenished. You can have the encouragement of peers who understand what it's like in the trenches, who stayed up all night as well, getting their IMLS grant ready and submitted on time, who have, just a wealth of knowledge and expertise, and they come into this association willing to share it and to be generous with their time and their talent. So that's what AAAM was for me. It was as a starting in the museum world. I started out, like I said, as a consultant learning AAAM mainly from like the conference host side of it. So I was meeting these people, I was seeing names, like I would see John Fleming, I saw Margaret Burroughs' name, I would see their names. I didn't really know the depth of the history behind that. And I think that's probably why that ended up being a dissertation topic for me, was that I had no idea. Mrs. Barnes helped me understand that, this late 19th century history that she was preserving of this small Black community in Tallahassee, why and how she came to know what it was, because these were her ancestors. These were people that she kind of inherited this knowledge from. I didn't realize that was happening all over the country. And it wasn't just happening in the 90s like it did in Tallahassee, but in the case of Margaret Burroughs, it was happening in 1941. Like that Black artists were looking at, she was alive when, I'm gonna say not George Washington Carver, but when Carter G. Woodson was, launching Negro History Week in Chicago, she was in Chicago. She was in Chicago when John H. Johnson launched Ebony magazine. And they were looking at the Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurstons and Countee Cullens of that time as people that they thought, and that they wanted to make sure their stories were told. They wanted to make sure that the work they were doing got preserved. And thinking about us as in the next generations that would come in the process. And I just found in AAAM this wealth of really knowledge, institutional knowledge, not just historians who were, doing the work of historians or public history, but people who had intimate knowledge of histories that are broadly known and then histories that aren't broadly known. And they could tell you things and share with you not just the importance of why we do this work, but how to do it successfully. And AAAM is a space where that's how I got a mentor. When I was trying to figure out, how do I grow my budget? I have a $200,000 annual budget and I need it to be closer to $500,000. What does that look like? And how do you do that as a Black institution? And how do you make sure you're taken seriously? And it was people like Beverly Robertson, Juanita Moore, Priscilla Hancock Cooper, John Fleming, Lawrence Pigeot, Alvia Wardlaw. I mean, these were board members when I came on the board in 2013. And they were board members at that point. And even some of them that had been past board members, they were more than willing, not just when you were in their presence physically, to take a phone call or to return an email. And with all that they were managing, they would give you, I remember Beverly sent me like her whole annual gala toolkit, like how they charge, what letters they sent out, every step of the way, how to successfully grow your gala to a place where you could like clear substantial amounts of money with an annual fundraiser. And that was true of every person I met. So my service on the board, I told Alvia recently, like, she set the standard of how you could be fully committed to your institution, in her case, Texas Southern University Museum, but equally as committed to the service and the expansion of the association, and that the two did not compete, that they really did serve and feed one another. So it was because of kind of seeing them as still a newbie on the board that really informed how I approached board service, because I saw them doing these amazing things. Anytime they did events, I would try to, if I couldn't physically go, I would, ask for whatever information, give me your advertising stuff, anything I could take and duplicate on my own level. And that really helped me understand that having that kind of collegial space to come together only makes you a better director. It only makes you a better practitioner. It can only make you better to kind of share in these collectives. I know we call it an association, but it is a family. It very much is, a cohort of people who would do anything they can to make sure you succeed. And in that way, it does remind me of like an HBCU experience, that it's that level of commitment to shared success.
And you've shown your commitment over the years to the organization, not just hosting it, but your board service, and our immediate past vice president of the board of the Association of African American Museums. Okay, I promise this is the very last question, in 2 minutes.
Okay.
What is your advice for people who want to enter into this field? Last question. Do
it. Just get started, and don't worry about what you don't bring. Bring whatever you have. Know that whatever you have is enough. And if it's just curiosity, if all you have is curiosity, that's enough. Use what you have, and know that this field is so wide and so expansive. It needs every form of talent. It needs every perspective. It needs every experience. And we need, I'll say this, now having 10 years in the field, we need fresh, young energy. We need fresh insight. We need the things that only that individual can bring. And I think, I think I said this earlier, but having skill sets that are not necessarily common across museums is a benefit. So you don't necessarily have to follow someone else's blueprint. But I would say just get started. And if getting started looks like volunteering, volunteer until a space or an opportunity opens up.
Marion McGee, thank you so much. I'm deeply grateful for you and your collegiality and your friendship. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.